Cinemasins has a fan club. It's called the Sin Club, and members get all sorts of things like early episodes, bonus videos, merch discounts, and even monthly bonus podcasts. Membership starts at $3 a month, and you can sign up now at patreon.com/cinemasins.
Oh wait, no, you know what? I am absolutely lying. No, I have totally seen Mockingbird. I just looked at it.
Welcome to SinCast, presented by Cinemasins.
Welcome to the SinCast. This is Chris Atkinson from Cinemasins, joined by Jonathan Watkins from Cinemasins.
Hello, hello.
And today we have a very special guest. It is producer Adrienne Biddle, who is a part of this movie called The Dark and the Wicked, coming out on November 6th. Thank you for giving us your time, Adrienne.
I mean, absolutely my pleasure. Very happy to be here.
You know, one thing that I think you're the first just straight up producer we've ever talked to before.
I believe so, yeah.
Nice.
And one thing that I like to do is sort of kind of, even though this is kind of 101 type stuff, just try to figure out what your job is as producer.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a very strange job title because it's a little bit of a catch-all. There's lots of different people who claim the title of producer who do different things. I'll, maybe reserve judgment on my feelings on that. But anyway, so, really what my approach to the role has always been that I'm sort of the translator, right? I look at myself and say, I have an understanding of kind of the different pieces of the business and, how they kind of fit together and how everybody thinks that their piece is the most important. Mm-hmm. But a grasp of how, they're all sort of synergistic relationships. And I sort of speak the languages of those different departments. I also, weirdly enough, speak artist. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a frustrated anything. Like I love being around creative people. I think I'm creative, but I'm not a creator. I don't paint. I don't draw. I'm a decent dancer, but other than that, I don't play an instrument. Like, blank page is terrifying to me. That's just not my thing. Mm-hmm. But what I sort of, I guess I call myself, I'm an appreciator. So I can look at someone's work and say, I think I'm sort of putting myself somewhat in your shoes and trying to understand kind of the message you're endeavoring to say and kind of have the ability to sort of say, okay, well, I think I get what you're putting down. It's working for me here. It's not working for me there. And then be able to sort of, form a relationship of trust or some kind of a bond between myself and the filmmaker, whether that be the writer, the director, or a combination of both, and then kind of translate for them into the business aspects. So to be able to sort of help bridge the gap between artist and financier, or artist and studio, or artist and, technical person if necessary. Mm-hmm. So, I'm a facilitator in that sense. So I help, I hire people and help put the crews together. So I consider myself a creative producer. Mm-hmm. I'm not a solely a line producer. I'm very hands-on, but, I do see my role as being kind of the overseer of, here's the vision we sort of sold to our financier. Here's the vision that, you as the filmmaker set out to achieve. I think we all agree that that's, what we're, embarking on. And then I sort of try to keep the ship afloat and get it to the finish line and deliver what it is that we set out to promise without compromising what the filmmaker set out to do.
Okay. Yeah. That gives me a really good idea there. It's, you always sort of think that you have this, you have some producers out there that are always that they have their thumbprint basically on the movie. So like, it doesn't matter who directs it. You can tell who was the producer of it because of how, that they have their little aesthetic that they follow. Sure. And everything.
Absolutely.
But would you say that there's anything visually in the movies or anything that you can spot in the movies that you would say that's my thumbprint right there?
It's really more narratively than it is visually. I mean, mm-hmm. I think, Like what brought Brian and I together 10 years ago, and this is our last movie together, but it's what was so exciting about that sort of that creative collaboration and that partnership is, he's a writer first. So, we kind of looked at the world and from similar lenses, and I think both had the same level of kind of aspirations of where the genre could go and should go and wasn't going, at least at the time we sort of started. For me, it's more about themes and story than it is necessarily visual. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, the story has to kind of speak to me on some level, and that's really my through line. I like complicated characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have seen. I don't know how many Jonathan has seen. I've seen a couple of movies that you've produced. One of them is called "He's Out There," which is a really, really it's a really fun horror movie.
Thanks.
And this movie and The Dark and the Wicked. I think The Dark and the Wicked definitely has a different style. You have different directors and everything, but there is some sort of movement, I feel like, going on where especially The Dark and the Wicked has this Ari Aster kind of feel to it. The horror movies that A24 is coming out with, and I know this is Shudder, so I don't mean to No,
my last two movies were A24, so I get you.
Mm-hmm. But that's sort of what I got feeling when I was watching The Dark and the Wicked. But just quickly touch on He's Out There. I thought that was a really well made film.
Agree.
It's scary in a different kind of way, and I can't quite put my finger on it because I've just recently seen it. But tell me what your experience was like on that.
Well, that was a tough one. This is a weird project because a number of people that I worked with sort of stepped away from the movie.
Oh, really?
So I'm loath to, I'm not sure like what I'm supposed to say and what I'm not supposed to say. But I will say this. So Mike Scannell wrote the script, mm-hmm. and Mike and Brian knew each other from UT Austin, like way back in the day. They'd been friends for years or whatever, and so. I met Mike through Brian, and I think he's a fantastic writer, and he still lives in Austin. But anyway, he was actually a part of The Dark and the Wicked, but he was the screenwriter on that. I think he's extraordinarily talented, and I think the whole idea, behind that story was, just to tap into this idea of just, again, being alone and isolated, and having someone who. It was just an interesting villain. It was an interesting mythology. The script had all of those things going for it. And so we thought, we could just make a very simple, very straightforward film off a good script. So I'm glad you guys liked it.
Yeah, I will tell you that is one of the most accurate portrayals of children in that situation. Because whenever I see these types of movies and kids are in it, they're always so quiet. Yeah. And they're always like behaving.
Right.
That would never happen. Like if my daughter and I were in this situation, she'd be screaming and like.
Mm-hmm. You know what's so nuts about children actors? Yeah. This is, we made The Monster, and Ella Ballantyne was the lead in The Monster, and she was older than these girls were. But, they're like little robots. It's so bizarre. So you're on set and they come in and they're happy and they're laughing, and the director's freaking out because it's like, how am I going to get them there? How am I going to make them scream and cry? And then it's like, okay, here's this, the director sits down and says, here's the setup, here's what's going on. And they're like, great. And then camera rolls and they're like, ah! Or they're screaming and, heart wrenching and, oh my God, I can't breathe. There's that scene in He's Out There when she's having an asthma attack, and then someone calls cut and they're like, how was it? and you're just like, what? This whole notion of, I got to get there and I got to tap into something. No, it's literally just instructions. And I find them amazing.
Yeah, I heard actually. I heard that about Jacob Tremblay on Dr. Sleep. They said he was just screaming bloody murder, and actually the adults were terrified, but then he'd be laughing or something once all was said and done, you know.
Really weird. It's a weird thing, and they're just resilient, and they don't take any of it too seriously. And this notion of, oh, it's make believe, I think, is very clear for them. So it just doesn't have the same emotional baggage as sometimes working with an adult going through a difficult scene can.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They were super good in it. Like there's a moment in there where Yvonne Strahovski is looking outside the window and doesn't see the kids, and you're like, oh no, what happened? But they're there. They're coming back, and I was like, oh, one of the girls seems to have a little bit of a secret, but she's not doing anything overt that makes me think that. It's just that I just you could, if you know kids, you know that there's something going on that they're not saying. And I thought that was, it wasn't anything like when the reveal there is something that they've been hiding or whatever. I didn't feel like I was smart. I just felt like they did something really good with their performance to make me think that. And I was like, man, they're actually really good. How in the world do you find kids who act this way?
They were great. They're actually sisters.
In real life?
Yeah, and Anna and Abby, they were great. I mean, they really were such pros, and and our director spent time working with them and talking to them or whatever. And that that whole sequence, the cupcake in the bathroom and all of it, like it was one of my favorite sequences in the script. And the idea that you pull out this cupcake and it's just it's like the grossest thing, and it's so terrifying, and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And I thought, Yvonne's fantastic, obviously. But the girls really nailed it. I mean, they really understood what our filmmaker was trying to get at, especially in the scene you pointed out when she's kind of, she hides the cupcake under her shirt. And, I was so glad that subtlety that was in the script, the filmmaker understood, the studio didn't fuck with, like they did everything else. Wow, that was intense. But yeah, and they really pulled it off. So
yeah.
And plus, we shot that movie outside of Montreal at this. The location, it was unreal, and we owned a hotel that had completely shut down. It was like a mountain resort, like think the Catskills, like Dirty Dancing kind of place. Same era, like they had an indoor tennis court, but not like old school,
Yeah.
And they were shutting down to renovate, and so we owned it. So it was like us and our crew in the middle of fucking nowhere in the woods of Canada. It was perfect. It was like the Overlook. I mean, everyone was like, it's just like the Overlook, the big long hallways. I mean, it was just this giant infrastructure. So it was a crazy experience. Not only the script was cool and the filmmaking project was cool, but the setting was remarkable. I mean, it was gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So Jonathan, I know that you've seen others, but sort of as a segue into this one, you've mentioned Brian Bertino. He came onto the scene with The Strangers, which is one of my favorite horror movies of the last decade, last decade. And then he made a movie. Have you seen The Monster, Jonathan?
Yes.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, that's another really cool movie. Now, he made Mockingbird before that, though, right?
Oh, so you've seen that too?
I have not. Unfortunately, I have not seen Mockingbird. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's totally okay.
Oh wait, no. You know what? I am absolutely lying. No, I have totally seen Mockingbird. I just looked at it. I am such a liar. All right. I remember reading this now. I'm so sorry. Yeah, this one, Mockingbird, because that was a little bit after The Strangers. I know he was, or maybe both of you were trying to get this one made and released, correct?
So I'll sort of start at the beginning and I'll try to be brief. So I met Brian before I worked at a company called Rogue Pictures, and I met him in general, and we were we hit it off. Just in the meeting, I thought this guy's incredibly smart, and I read a sample, which was The Strangers, and I was like, that's the scariest script I've read in years. So I go for my job interview when Rogue Pictures is born, and in my job interview, my future boss sort of says to me, is there any scripts that you've read lately that you love? And I said, oh my God, I just read this incredible script by this writer named Brian Bertino, and it's called The Strangers. And he was like, that we own it. So I thought, oh shit, I'm never getting this job. I should have done my homework. So we had this big long conversation. Anyway, long story short, I get the job. So I am now a studio executive at Rogue Pictures. And so one of my first projects, I said, I want to run The Strangers. I want that to be my movie. And through a variety of different circumstances, Brian was not supposed to direct it. He'd never directed anything before, like nothing, no shorts, nada. But I said to my boss, I said, look, you got to meet this kid. He's very impressive, and we should, whatever, have it overall with him or something. Anyway, so they have this great meeting, and my boss kind of picks up the vibes that I do, which is he should probably direct this script. Well, that was kind of news to the producers. They were not certain because, it's a studio movie and he was an unproven commodity. Anyway, I sort of convinced everybody that my boss sort of shepherded the whole thing and said, Brian should be the guy to direct it. And then I stepped off. I did not oversee that movie or any of the making of it. So that is not, I can't take any credit for it, but I did get Brian that job. So cut to, however many years later, the world melts down. We have the big financial crash, and GE, who is the parent company of Universal, who owned Rogue, sold the division. So Brian had, because of the success of The Strangers, it was Universal's most profitable movie that year. Everyone loved it, whatever. We had lots of projects with him. We were going to do Strangers. He wrote the script for Strangers 2. He had another script that we had bought. Like, we were going to be in the Brian Bertino business. And then we got sold. So Brian's work life kind of came to a halt through no fault of his own because there was a transfer of ownership. And in that transfer of ownership, when Rogue was sold to Relativity didn't do anything with the slate that we had built. So there's a lot of people who are like, where did Brian Bertino go? Well, the truth is he went the road of, oh shit, my whole work life is wrapped up in this company that doesn't exist anymore. So now I've got to, find something else. So I found myself without a job because, when they went to Relativity, they were like, fuck you very much and see ya. And so Brian and I had become, I had hired him to do a rewrite, whatever. We had become friendly, and we had just sort of talking. And I said, we should have a production company together. Like, that's what we should do. So about a year after I left Rogue, he and I formed a business. And the first project that we did was Mockingbird. That he originally also random piece of trivia. Sam Ishmael, who, he's responsible for Mr. Robot, and he did Homecoming. And so Sam has a career. Anyway, Sam came up with the concept for Mockingbird because Sam and Brian are friends, and we're friends back from a ways before Sam was big Sam Ishmael.
I can totally see that being a concept he would come up with based on Mr. Robot and Homecoming. Yeah, that's very cool.
So the two of them brainstormed that. So if you ever watch Mockingbird, there's a story by credit for Sam Ishmael in there.
Okay.
But, and then it was going to be an experimental film. And we had a filmmaker who, was a baby filmmaker who we liked, and we were like, let's just do it. And the problem was everybody heard that Brian had written the script eventually for it. And we were talking about this being an experimental movie. Let's make it for, no money at all and go and do interesting stuff. And we're going to shoot it all. We had a whole production plan. And all the distributors were like, but Brian, we're not interested. You need to direct it. You need to direct it. You need to direct it. So after a million of instances of this, he finally said, fine, let's just get it off the ground and direct it. So he was never supposed to. But he did, and it is what it is. And we made it. We were the first movie, I think, that Jason Blum did under his deal at Universal.
Yeah.
That was that was a weird. Again, that was sort of a weird movie. It was supposed to be an experimental film that Brian didn't direct, and ultimately that changed into a studio movie that Brian.
Oh, that's interesting.
Also weird. So yeah, that was Mockingbird. And then after Mockingbird, I believe the next one was The Black Coat's Daughter,
which is just freaking amazing. That was you worked with Oz Perkins. I was really curious about working with him because
he's incredible. He's an incredible human being. I loved every minute of that, making that movie with him, and it took us 4 years because Oz, like Brian, was someone that I read the script, I fell in love with it. I met Oz. They remind me of each other in a weird way. Brian's very tall. He's 6'4". Oz is 6'4". I say this with no but I objectively, Brian's an attractive person. Oz is an attractive person. I thought, here's someone who is a unknown quantity, but I can stick them in a room with any actor, and the actor will enjoy that conversation because they're smart, they're articulate, they understand the material. And, it's clear that they see the movie in their head, even if they don't have a sample to support it. So we said, Oz, you need to direct the movie and we'll support you to do that. And then 4 years later, we found someone who agreed to do it. It took us 4 years to get that movie off the ground.
Oh my God. And I just remember it was going to come out and then it wasn't. And I was getting really excited about it.
2 years after we were done. I mean, that was a whole, it was a crazy process.
Yeah. Because I didn't have friends of mine had seen it at film festivals and stuff. And so.
Everyone thought his next Netflix movie was his first movie.
Yeah.
It came out, I think, maybe even after it,
No, I believe it did. I'm almost positive I saw I can't remember the name of it now. The pretty girl lives
in the house.
Yes. I saw that before I saw Black Coats start. It was within a month of each other. I think the Blu-ray came out of Black Coats a few weeks after it or something. And that just blew me away because that was Emma Roberts and
Kieran Shipka.
Kieran Shipka. Yeah. And that was just, that movie was so
and Lucy Boynton before Lucy Boynton.
Yes.
Lucy
that
Boynton.
was my first experience with Lucy Boynton. Yeah. That movie just blew me away. And I typically watch that around this time of year, every year. It's kind of become it's very wintry. So it works. It works really nice around this time of year.
That is truly a movie from start to finish that I am most proud of, that I was most happy with, that I had the best experience on. It really
that's great to hear.
A terrific experience. And Oz is a real talent.
Yeah, because just going back a little bit to Mockingbird though, and because now that I realize I've seen it, I remember the thing I remember about that though was that was really before we didn't really know what streaming stuff that was going straight to streaming was going to be, because I believe Mockingbird eventually I think it might have premiered before that, but I feel like as far as getting eyes on it was Netflix.
Blum waited a minute. I mean, we had a little bit of the trouble of found footage fatigue. And so, you have a movie as different and interesting and all that stuff as it might be, that medium had just kind of worn out its welcome. And so, and again, love the movie or hate it, I still think a little bit of a knock against it at the time was just we were not first.
But the premise itself is so interesting, though. The people finding the cameras, or the cameras were sent to them, and then they start getting these instructions that they have to record. It was just it's such a cool setup. And I just remember being like, this is the guy who directed The Strangers, and this is just going to Netflix. And I was, I didn't know what to think. And then I watched it and I was like, why wasn't that in theaters? That totally should have been in a theater, at the time.
Our business is such a weird, it has changed so dramatically since I started down this road of producing on my own. It has just been so different. And so, I sort of look, what I tell myself so I can sleep at night and not jump off a bridge is I've just been ahead of my time a bunch,
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, that was a fun movie to make too. We actually, I won't, no spoilers, but the red balloon stuff was pretty nuts.
I bet.
And fun to do. So anyway,
I totally recommend that movie to anybody who hasn't seen it. The Monster though, that was one of the first times I remember seeing Zoe Kazan in anything, and then Ella Ballantine, that's who played the daughter, correct? Yep. They were just really, that's the one thing I always remember. I haven't seen it in a few years, but that's the thing I took away from that movie, was that really interesting mother-daughter relationship. Because, the Zoe Kazan character isn't necessarily a good person in some ways. But then they're stuck in that situation where they have to, there's a monster, and as the title says, and that's just, I just love, I don't know, those movies I would think would be kind of fun to make, where it's almost like one setting. I mean, you did flashbacks, but there's like one main setting, and you don't, and then you've got something's out there trying to get them. It always, like, that type of thing just draws me in immediately. So
yeah, it was, I mean, we tried to make it, we actually, believe it or not, we shot Blackcoat's Daughter and the Monster on the same campus. It was like a randomly half shut down university in Ontario, Canada. And it just so happened that when we were shooting Blackcoat's Daughter, we had gotten financing. A24 had bought the Monster. So we were looking for a good location to shoot that movie in as I was wrapping up Blackcoat's. And, my unit guy on Blackcoat's was like, I just drove down this place because we wanted a road. We needed to own a road, and owning a road, practically speaking, from a producer standpoint, is actually quite complicated. Because you can't leave it if it's a working road. What are you going to do? Own it for 30 nights? So. And anyway, we happened to find something that worked on the same spot. And so we were in the middle of the fucking woods in the middle of the summer. We had mosquito sprays. Shh, don't tell EPA. Because we were in the summer in, muggy, wooded, wet. It was awful. It was absolutely miserable. And that movie was almost an entire night shoot. I mean, it was brutal. But
oh, wow.
It was... Zoe and Ella just give unbelievable performances. And as I was saying in the beginning of our conversation, the complicated nature of her character was wonderful to me. You know what I mean? Because I think mothers take all different, come in all different shapes and sizes, and love looks very different a lot of the time. And sometimes it's, 100% great, and sometimes it's 25% great, but it's still love. And sort of, how do you process that? And my mother and I are very, very close, and we have a complicated relationship, and she's a wonderful woman, and I'm not saying she's Zoe Kazan, because she's not. But you don't always get along with them. They don't always do stuff that makes sense to you. And I thought that was something you don't see a lot explored in movies, especially I think with women. Complicated women and mothers are a weird, they're either super awful or they're super awesome.
Yeah.
But the gray nature of all of us, I think, is what really kind of stood out to me in that project. And Zoe is a phenomenal actor. And so, you really needed to get somebody of that skill level to be able to kind of put all that out there. So you're not being overly wordy, because as you all have probably noticed, Brian is not the most verbose of writers. So there's a lot of silence in his stuff, which I think is spectacular, because that's life. Not everybody's as chatty as me.
Yeah. I think bringing up the gray, I think that's the best way to put it, because I was hesitant to even say she wasn't like a great person, because then I think people are just, that haven't seen it, are just going to think like, oh, she's Mommy Dearest, or, because that's typically, like you said, it's one extreme or the other. Right. So she just feels like a real mother that is going through something, She's a young
mother. She had issues, and we kind of all struggle through life trying to do our best. And I think that that's really real. Part of the reason I love the genre, and it's why I've sort of done it most of my career, is, you used to have sort of great theatrical quality dramas, right? Where you could explore like dark shit, abortion, fucking, miscarriage. I don't mean to go on like mommy stuff, but, abuse, like all kinds of dark bits of all of, you go back to The Shining, he's an alcoholic, like he's an abusive father. Like there are all of these sort of nooks and crannies that used to just be kind of the purview of the genre. But if you stick like a ghost or a vampire or, a monster, you can tell those stories now. And you can do it, in a spot where you're going to get a lot of people are going to having a good time. It's like flavored cough medicine. There's still interesting stuff to discuss and explore and examine in yourself. And this is the kind of genre movies that I personally like to work on. And, again, there's lots of fun horror movies out there that don't have big things to say or aren't overly complicated. And those are awesome. I just like the stuff that, if you look in the corners and the cracks, you can kind of get into some interesting questions and look in the mirror and be like, oh, there's something with a little bit more depth there. And I scare you to boot. And that's the draw for me.
Well, you're saying that Brian Bertino is not verbose. Is what sort of lends itself to what the kind of mood is being set in The Dark and the Wicked. I don't know if it's been a while since I've seen a movie that made me feel this hopeless beginning to end.
Yeah, totally fair.
Like from the beginning
in the past, for sure.
From the beginning, you're sitting there going, I don't think this is going to get better. I don't know if this is ever going to get better. Like as far as like the mood of the movie, and it just draws you into this whole thing where you're sort of steeling yourself up for, it's possible they may not be able to get out of this, and you just sit there and watch this movie going, oh my God, is there a way out? I don't know if there is. And I think what happens here is I don't know if this is the thought process in the directing, but is it the fact that there's like is there longer takes and there's just more taking your time and there's fewer jump scares? Is that sort of how you create that environment, or is there some more to it?
Actually, if you break down The Dark and the Wicked, there are more scares pound for pound in that movie than there are in a lot of the other stuff that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that from a filmmaker's point of view, Brian has always had the ability to sort of create a frame, and he's got a good taste in cinematographers. They really get on the same page, but whether it's negative space, like there are lots of sort of tricks of the trade that you can do to kind of create that atmosphere. But to your point, I think that we as viewers, and I think this runs into studios and to filmmakers too, we get a little impatient, right? We're so used to kind of the frenetic pace of movies, and we certainly had an era of kind of this, quick cuts and the Michael Bay sort of editorial style and just sort of overly stimulated, short attention span, and I think that Brian demonstrated in The Strangers and does it again here. And James Wan did it when, looking back and saying, Insidious also took its time.
Mm-hmm.
Filmmakers who are patient is, I think, really crucial in this spot, because if you think about when you're home by yourself at night and you hear a weird sound, like there's no score, there's no sting, there's no action soundtrack, there's no CG beast. It's you alone in the dark with a noise.
Right.
And that moment can last in your head for an hour. And that tension is what creates that tone. And so I think it's like a balloon, right? You've got to inflate the balloon, and the balance is when do you let the air out of the balloon? And so, I think the really skilled filmmakers who know how to create tension are the ones who have a good instinctive and intuitive feeling for when to let that air out. So you kind of build it, and the audience is leaning in, they're waiting for something to happen. It's like comedy, right? It's all timing. So where's the moment between I've leaned in so long that now I'm bored, or I've leaned in so long that I'm so tense that like when it comes, I'm like, that I think is what Brian does very, very well in terms of that. And going into the editing room with him, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, like I can't watch this frame any longer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the truth is, usually he's a little bit too long and I'm way too short. It's somewhere in the middle. But that instinct of we all want that tension to be released, but you forget that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I don't know if it's because I don't know. I'm much older now. I'm 43, and I did a bunch of. I worked in a movie theater as a projectionist and watched hundreds of horror movies, and the pop horror sensibility I started getting really tired of. I don't in general I don't like them. It takes somebody like James Wan to do something that I really care about in horror when it comes to the pop horror stuff. And it's a breath of fresh air, as I did bring up the fact that this movie is super hopeless, but the thing is watching it is still a breath of fresh air, because I'm sitting there going like, yes, this is an awful thing, but I'm also like engrossed in it. Whereas with pop horror, with the, like you mentioned, the score and the quick editing and just out of nowhere jump scares, like that makes no sense whatsoever. To see something like this is just a balm to those type of movies.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, that's kind of what we wanted to set out to do. And I, if it says anything, Brian's single source, or not single, but his primary source of inspiration, probably his favorite movie of all time, the thing that kind of tells you everything you know, is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean,
yeah.
So, his personal dream is, I want someone at the end of my movies to cry and scream at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So there is there's certainly a dark and despairing tone that's here. But I think, again, going back to sort of themes or whatever, like, grief is a bitch, man. And it is, and my hope when I first read the script, well, actually when Brian first pitched me the idea and we started talking about making this movie, it was like, the thing that I thought would hopefully reach a lot of people is, as we all get older, we're all dealing with, everyone's parents are going to die. It's if they haven't already, I mean, it's a terrible, terrible, sad, not particularly tragic cycle of life, but nonetheless a huge impact, or not, depending on who you are and what your relationships are. But it is something we are all going to go through. And I think something that a lot of us don't think very much about, with good reason. I don't want to sit around and think about my parents dying, but it's real, and it's weird. And, we're not, the idea that all of a sudden you're going to be like, I've got to take care of somebody else. And what does that look like? And am I close to, like, it's just a thing that I think happens that takes a lot of us by surprise. And it can be awkward and challenging. And, just like in The Strangers, I mean, one of the things that I loved about that movie, and when I first read the script, is sort of, I think what he's done here also on The Dark and the Wicked, is you're dealing with a very real life piece of drama. The Stranger starts out with a couple going out on a retreat, and she's breaking up with him when he asked her to marry him. Like, that's awkward and terrible, and they're stuck in this house in the middle of nowhere, and she just said no, and so that's awful. And so you kind of lean into that drama. You're like, how is this going to play out? Same goes here. They're coming home, they're dealing with this grief, and you leaning in saying, okay, how's that going to play out? And then you introduce this something else, and that just kind of peels more of the layers back, right? Fear is the great clarifier. And I think that was, sort of the interesting part of this story in this movie is, fear really kind of reveals who we are. You don't have time or energy for pretense, and that's another reason I like it.
I was just going to say, I guess a little bit of a background on what this movie's about. I don't think we've actually talked about it, but
it's really, really depressing.
Yes. It's filled. I guess if there's a common horror term, you could say it's filled with dread throughout it. It's the father of the family is very sick, and a brother and sister come out to visit. The mother says, you should just go back home and not worry about this, but she's acting strangely. And then this movie basically, all of the characters who are on this farm basically start, hallucinating, waking nightmare, that type of thing is going on in this, where the sort of reality and fantasy are all sort of blended in together. But go ahead, Jonathan. You were about to ask a question.
Oh, well, I was just, you're talking about, like, one thing that really got me about this movie was how it did deal with, it felt so relatable if anybody's lost their parent, and on top of that, if anybody's had to actually take care of their parents.
Yes.
Because, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's clearly something going on outside of that, but at the same time, is it Marin, Ireland? Is that how you pronounce her? Marin, sorry. Marin Ireland, who's great in this movie.
Yeah, she is.
She's kind of stuck though. It's like, even though there's this stuff going on, she can't do anything about it. She still has to take care of her dad.
Yep.
And, just that does feel a little hopeless and a little, terrifying. Right. And I love that too. It's realistic. Like they try to do things like leave, and there's reasons that they can't.
Yeah.
And which I always love, because, that's the thing with a lot of supernatural house movies, is that, like, why wouldn't you just go?
Yeah, just go hotel, for God's sake. Yeah. Well, and you're so right. I mean, that was the thing that I thought that you have those aha light bulb moments when you read scripts, and I remember when I read the first draft of this, I was like, oh man, I just love the fact that they can't leave, and it, like, you just can't, like, based on the way the story goes. You can't, like, it's not even a discussion worth having. Like, it's obvious that you can't in that situation, and it's organic and authentic, and man, that would suck,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What a bummer. I don't know if you guys know this. That is Brian's family's farm.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow. No.
I know that.
Yes, we shot that on that is where his father and his stepmother live. And the house that we shot in is actually a house that is on the property that Brian goes and writes at. So that is where he wrote the script for this.
It must have been fun setting up a whole movie set on there then, because he knows the ins and outs of that place and knows what where to creep you out and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we had the production plan around this movie was unusual for us, and we had done it deliberately. A little bit of like a reuniting of a number of different facets of, whatever journeys along the way. Sonny Molly, who was one of the producers on The Strangers, was a producer alongside myself on the movie, as is Kevin Matuso, who was one of my producing partners on The Blackcoat's Daughter. So, and Brian was a producer on The Blackcoats as well. And anyway, we kind of all known each other and worked together in the past and had the same sort of sense. And Sonny had made a movie that I think is coming out, that Blumhouse is releasing, called, I believe they retitled, it's called Based on True Events or Inspired by True Events, I think is the new title. The movie's actually amazingly good. I really loved it. But
cool.
He had done this movie in a very unusual way, budgetarily, and kind of how he constructed all of this. And he gave Brian the idea, who then came to me and said, you know what, maybe we should try to do what Sonny did and make a movie like this, which would give us freedom and we can experimental in some ways, but do it through my lens, not through Sonny's lens. So when he wrote the script, he thought, all right, well, in order to accomplish this sort of unique production plan, I got to find a story that is organic to that, as opposed to just doing something more cheaply. Like, I hate it when movies do that, when you're like, oh, that movie should have been made for $10 million. And clearly they had two. You want it to feel organic. It's like, let's, submit your iPhone movie. And it's like, well, unless it kind of makes sense that you're shooting it on an iPhone, otherwise it just looks like you're shooting your phone on your camera, and it's why not just shoot it on a regular camera? Anyway. Yeah. So he was like, I understand the logistics of this on my farm makes sense. You know what I mean? I get it. I have access to it, and we're in the middle of fucking nowhere in Texas. And, and the goats creep me out, and I mean, it's a working goat farm. So he wrote it there with sort of our whole thing in mind. And it came together really nicely. I mean, look, they're the best reviews that we've gotten so far in our career. So, part of me is like, the movie's good, but people are seeming to love it, and I'm so glad. I mean, it was a real challenge, but I think it came together. And Tristan Nyby won Best Cinematographer out of Sigis this year, for this movie. And the movie's beautiful. I mean, that's the other thing. Like if you go back to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's beautiful. You know what I mean? It's a beautiful,
absolutely. Yeah.
And we always and you think about The Shining, like The Shining's a gorgeous movie. And that was another, you talk about when you asked me the question about visual aesthetic. I think these movies should look like movies. They should be beautiful and well composed and shot on appropriate equipment and have lighting. You know what I mean? Like, I think that is important to the genre. It just gives it the respect and seriousness I think it deserves.
Well, and Bertino doesn't shy away from the gore by any means. I mean, there's one scene in particular in this movie that was just like, whoa. But much like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, though, it's not a lot of, it's more, like you said, it's more about the atmosphere and the aesthetic, and which is really interesting, because I think a lot of people that haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre, haven't seen it in a long time, don't realize that movie is borderline PG as far as visuals. People think The Strangers has all this violence. Literally,
there's two shots with blood in it in the entire film.
Yeah.
And again, it's our philosophy is, I don't mind gore, just earn it. You know what I mean? All you got to do is earn it.
And the scene in question in Dark and the Wicked definitely earns it. So
well, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, it's horror is a state of mind. You know what I mean? It's not a blood bucket. So that's the goal, to just get under your skin.
I really appreciated the sound design on this movie.
Those guys fucking killed it.
Yeah.
They did. They killed it. I mean, Sonny had worked with them on his movie. He introduced us to them. It's Joe Stockton out of Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky.
Oh, really?
And, they nailed it. I mean, they just did an unbelievable job on this film.
Yeah,
we couldn't have been happier.
It's one of those. It's one of those where the sound of this movie is so important to how you're feeling and everything. Just to some stuff you hear in the background, and it's just it puts you in that environment really well.
Well, the thing, I think, Brian has always felt this way, and Strangers had it too. It's like, score is important, but again, I go back to my story. There isn't any when you're home by yourself in the dark, and so on some level, I think silence, if done well, is scarier than anything you can come up with. And so populating that silence with kind of ambient whatever is the hallmark of a good horror sound designer. And it's incredibly important. And, I always say this, and unfortunately it's not as relevant as it used to be, but I used to always say sound design is the visual effects of horror.
Yeah, you're right.
Now everyone's using visual effects, which I personally think, take away from, I'm a huge practical effect nerd, but yeah. So, I mean, I think it's true. It is the most important thing of I think a lot of horror movies. I mean, it's
if
everything.
A practical effect looks bad, it's still real, like,
yes.
That's my whole end argument to all of that. A visual effect never ever does, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it just doesn't matter ever. Whereas if you make a practical effect and that looks cheesy, well, at least it looks like something I can actually touch. So
yeah,
we briefly talked about the actors in this. Marin Ireland is great. I haven't seen nearly enough of her. I looked at her credits after this, and I was like, "Oh, well, I missed that, and I missed that." Hell or High Water is the top credit that I've seen her in, and she doesn't have, she has like a couple of scenes in that movie. She's great in it, but in this movie, I don't know. I'm very, very drawn to her. There's something, and obviously Michael Abbott's really good too, but this is her movie, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
And she, there's just something about her eyes and her expressions in this. You're always looking to it as your sort of guide through this movie. And so tell me about her and tell me how you got her on this movie.
Sonny actually Brian was a huge fan of Marin's. And, but Sonny had made produced a movie actually, with, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name right now? I'm a huge fan of his, and I'm such an idiot. Take Shelter, help me.
It's Jeff Nichols.
Yes. So Jeff Nichols and Sonny had done this movie together, and it was Marin and Michael had played brother and sister together. So when we were talking about Marin, who we'd been fans of because Brian liked her in Sneaky Pete and some of the other stuff that she had done, and his whole thing is, I want an actor who feels like a person, like a real person, you know, and you know, who gets it, who has character in their face, you know, and who's just a real actor, you know, who really is that. And so we try to go out and to find people who, you know, may not have done the genre before, you know what I mean? So they're unexpected. So you don't have you're not like, oh, it's, you know, it's a Mila Jovovich movie. I like Mila Jovovich movies, but they're, you know, it's like Tom Cruise, right? Like just to be able to lose yourself in a character or someone that you don't associate in this genre, I think is something that we always felt was important, you know, to keep people and pull them into the story. And so Brian was a huge fan of Marin, really fought hard, was like, I want her in this movie. And then Sonny exposed us to Michael because he'd done this movie before. And he's like, this guy's amazing. Like, he's just a really good actor. And so, and since, again, we were a very small movie, they knew each other. We knew that was going to be helpful. And so it just kind of came together. But, you know, we were all living in the middle of nowhere in this little tiny town in Texas. And, you know, and she really brought it. I mean, you know, it is a hard movie, and she went there, you know. And Michael did too. They were total pros to work with. It was a delight because, you know, as you point out, like a movie like this can live or die on that lead actor. You know what I mean? You're not saying a lot, so you need the actors to convey the stuff that's going on between to kind of give you the emotional ballast. And as you said, the sort of guidepost, like, I'm looking to you to tell me kind of how I'm supposed to feel right now, or how you're feeling, and that will translate to me. And she's an incredibly expressive actor. Also, Ella Valentine, the lead of The Monster, is you know, has her cameo, or I guess a much older Ella Valentine. She's amazing. So
yeah, she is. She's it is a sort of a combination of what she does and what Brian does in this, where there's a, you know, it starts off fairly normal, her introduction, but just through some subtleties of what she does through as the scene progresses, it really just like gets you on edge and everything. Jonathan, you were about to say something.
I was just commenting that was interesting. You said Marin and Michael had played brother and sister before. That's really, because they feel like brother and sister. So
yeah, I mean, it was, we knew the pairing worked. Brian loosely based some of these characters on people he knows, right? He's on his family's farm. There's certain, you know, Marin often talks about how her character is kind of Brian. And so it was important that the role of her brother embodies some of the qualities that he kind of had envisioned in his head, you know, from the people that he'd drawn from. And Michael's a big dude. Michael's, you know, 6'3", I think. You know, he's not a little tiny man. He wanted somebody who felt like he worked on the farm. Because again, that brings a level of authenticity to the character. So,
and I don't know why Xander Berkeley isn't in more horror movies. Maybe this is just me, but whenever that guy's in a scene, I'm on edge because I don't know what type of character he plays. The holding his cards back very well. He
is bananas in the best possible way. But you know, Xander Berkeley is a character.
Awesome.
But what was so great about him, he flew in and out in a day. I mean, he was not on set very long. So we didn't have, but you know, every time it was different. Every time he gave you something new and different, a different approach, a different, a different way of looking at this character. And so you had so much sort of to choose from to kind of construct and build the priest that ultimately made the most sense for the movie. And that's a real testament to his professionalism and his talent, you know what I mean? To be able to kind of give us all those options and to do all that stuff in such a short period of time. But again, I mean, talk about the it factor. He is an incredibly charismatic man.
It's crazy. That guy has 250, I think, credits, somewhere around there. I mean, and I think about half of those were in the 90s, but like in 1995 alone, probably.
Well, we recently just had a week where both of our videos had him in it. Like, we didn't even, realize it till after the fact. We were just like, oh yeah, he was in everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He was
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I was everything. Just my husband and I were watching. My husband he'll hate me for saying this, but like, questionable taste in film sometimes. He's the guy that likes the bad movie, or he likes the movie that was awesome then, but is totally dated now, but we'll go back and watch it, Yeah. And I'm not like I'm not a cinephile, so I'm not like overly snooty about movies, but whatever. Anyway, we were randomly watching, I think it was Terminator.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, that's Xander Berkeley.
Yeah.
My movie. It was just, it's weird.
I mean, he would just pop up like it was in the 90s, especially now. I mean, he's worked just as much after the 90s that he did in the 90s, but it was like every big movie that came out just would have some random pop in from Xander Berkeley. It seemed like it was insane. He becomes that very welcome presence anytime he shows up in a movie. I love it. We would like to thank Adrienne Biddle for giving her time. The Dark and the Wicked comes out on November 6th in theaters, digital on demand. Can vouch for you that it's a good movie. You can watch
Absolutely.
this and I mean, be in the right mood to watch it, but it's good. It's good. That's going to do it for this interview. It's Chris Atkinson and Jonathan Watkins. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Comment on our episodes on our SoundCloud page. Check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. And be sure to visit cinemasins.com.